I mostly work with lens-based media because that's how I started doing artwork and that's what I'm comfortable with. I feel like my camera and my voice recorder are like democratic tools that I can always approach topics with them. And the topics that I work on, they mostly come from my lived experiences. My name is Mana and I'm originally from Iran, but I'm currently studying for my master's in Finland. I grew up in a household where we always watched like lots and lots of movies, Iranian movies, and my father always reads us poems. Like even now when I call him in video calls, he reads me poems. So I grew up with a lot of movies and poems, so that's what I would like to work with in my artworks. And in Iranian cinema, touch and intimacy is not shown in front of the camera, and this disconnect that I always see between what is represented as art or cinema and what I see in my personal life shaped most of my practices. And I call them narrative gaps because they're like huge gaps between what is seen and what is something that I live with. So the project that I'm currently working on is about some stories that I have found in different non-mainstream historical evidences, for example, oral history or poems and diaries and photos. So I have found traces of marginalized stories that happened but didn't find scant mention in the mainstream of storytelling of Iran. And it's mainly in the context of Iran's history. And the reason that I started this project was that totally by accident, I found this documentary about Iranian women protesting in 1979 on Women's Day, March 8th. And I didn't know about this big protest that happened, which is surprising. And then I digged into the documents and I realized that they never made it digital until 30 years after the thing happened. So I started thinking that maybe there are other gaps that I don't know about them. And that was something that I'm interested in. And I started collecting traces of different stories. And the way that I chose them was that they had a thread that connects them together, and this thread is a prophecy that these characters kind of try to transmit to one another. And in one of the stories that I found, the characters died in a cave. And when I traveled to the place of origin of this story, I realized that the cave was destructed due to the mining activities. And I started reading about how history and story are constantly borrowing elements from each other. So history is quasi-fictional and story is always quasi-historical. I'm really interested in these elements that are similar in history and story, and I try to fill these gaps with fiction that I make. So I traveled here to Portugal because I wanted to take some footages from locations that are loaded with mythological and cultural folklores that are not necessarily connected to the stories that I say, but there are always interconnection between them. The relationship between history and story comes from the book that I read by Paul Ricoeur, which is Time and Narrative, and he talks about how history is quasi-fictional because in order for us to narrate a historical event, we borrow elements from fiction to narrate that historical event. And then when we tell a story, we're always talking about a thing that has happened. So in that sense, we're borrowing elements from history. because we're talking about another time. So I'm really interested in this constant connection that they have. And the difference between fiction and story. Well, some people differentiate these two, but I don't do that, because I feel like even history is not really factual, because it's kind of a storytelling, and we can really rely on the facts that we read in mainstreams and documents. The ideas come from my daily routine, and I don't differentiate between what is artwork and what is my routine, because I'm always living with them. I feel like theory and practice are integral in my artwork, so I always try to build an infrastructure with theory, and then I start practicing what I've read or what I've seen. And this theory doesn't necessarily come from books or articles. It can come from movies, poems, and all sorts of resources. I have this notebook that I write my ideas in, and the ones that I actually move forward with are the ones that I can practice. So limitations and resources shapes the way I work on my ideas. I never know that I'm done, and that's something that I'm struggling with a lot. I always go back to my ideas, and I always see interconnection between the works that I've done. So it's not like I have 7 finished projects, rather I have 7 interconnected stories that are touching each other. Something that might seem a bit strange is that the climate here is really similar to where I live, and the stories that I work on are originated in my hometown. And this gives me the opportunity to feel more connected, and even though it's not the same place, it's helping me finding threads and connections between different non-places. Because also the idea of non-place is something that I'm working on, because I'm making fictions in the places that are not really related to the original places of the stories. That's how I'm making this interconnection, and that's how I'm talking about when evidence are fading, we need to maybe fill them with fiction. So I feel like this place is giving me this groundedness that I needed. There's something in living together and working together that, for example, we come here and work, and we normally don't talk to each other because everyone is focusing on their work. And then when we go back home, in the past week, there were amazing discussions happening late night or early in the morning, when you don't really expect to talk to people, but then things happen. For example, the other day I had this moment of despair editing my movie, because I looked at the footages a million times, and then I closed the laptop and I started talking to Maria, and we ended up talking about different things that weren't necessarily related to the work. But then when I was going back to sleep that night, I wrote down our conversation, and it turned out to be super helpful for continuing my work. So I feel like this unexpected things that happen between us are something that is unique and very peculiar things that happen. I feel like the thing that happened during the last week was that I started to actually decide what I'm doing. And I've been having this idea for the last 2 years, which is a long time, and I was never sure what I want to do with the things that I'm collecting. And over the last week, with the talks that I had with the mentors and with other fellow artists, I actually decided that yes, this is what I want to do, and this is the kind of movie that I want to make.